Nobody understood why the Rockies kept throwing inside to Shohei Ohtani. At first, it looked like ordinary baseball. A tight pitch in the first inning. Another one near his hands in the third. Then another fastball climbed dangerously toward his shoulder by the fifth. But by the time the cameras caught Colorado's dugout reacting after another near-hit pitch late in the game, the entire feeling around Dodger Stadium had changed. Fans were no longer watching a baseball game. They were watching something that felt personal. Something deliberate. And according to several people inside the Dodgers organization after the game, what happened during Game 1 against the Rockies was not an accidental baseball emotion. It was a plan. A dangerous one. And once Major League Baseball began reviewing what was caught on camera, the fallout became impossible for Colorado to escape. The game itself had already carried unusual tension before the first pitch was even thrown. The Dodgers entered the series riding momentum, while the Rockies arrived struggling badly and sitting near the bottom of the standings. On paper, it did not look competitive. But baseball rarely follows paper. And everyone inside the stadium could feel almost immediately that Colorado had arrived with a different kind of energy. The Rockies were talking loudly from the dugout before the game even started. Their pitchers attacked hitters aggressively during warm-ups. Even routine ground balls seemed to carry extra emotion. It was the kind of atmosphere that experienced players notice right away. The kind that quietly warns everyone that something heavier may happen later. And right in the middle of that atmosphere stood Shohei Ohtani. As always, the cameras followed him constantly. Fans rose from their seats every time he stepped near the on-deck circle. Children held signs with his name written across them. The stadium buzzed differently whenever he appeared. For opposing teams, that attention can become exhausting. Pitchers no one mistake by Ohtani can become a national headline within seconds. One hanging breaking ball can disappear into the upper deck and live on social media for days. And perhaps that pressure was already sitting inside Colorado's dugout before the game even began. The first moment came in the opening inning. Ohtani stepped into the batter's box calmly while the Rockies pitcher stared toward home plate longer than usual. The catcher set up inside. Then came the fastball. 97 miles per hour and climbing directly toward Ohtani's hands. Ohtani jerked backward just in time as the crowd gasped loudly. The ball missed him by inches. The Dodgers dugout immediately reacted. Several players stood near the railing staring toward the mound. But Ohtani himself remained calm. He simply adjusted his batting gloves, stepped back into the box, and continued the at-bat like nothing had happened. The broadcasters called it aggressive pitching. Nothing more. At least at first. But then it happened again. In the third inning, another fastball rode dangerously high and inside, forcing Ohtani to spin away awkwardly near the dirt. This time the crowd booed immediately. Even the commentators sounded uncomfortable. One broadcaster pointed out that Colorado pitchers had barely challenged Ohtani over the plate all night. Everything was inside. Everything was tight. Everything felt dangerous. Still, the game continued. Ohtani walked after a long at-bat, calmly took first base, and never once looked toward the mound. That detail mattered later. Because while the tension around the game kept growing, Ohtani himself never escalated anything publicly. The Dodgers eventually took the lead in the middle innings after Mookie Betts ripped a double into the gap. The stadium exploded with energy. But strangely, the Rockies seemed even more emotional after falling behind. Cameras repeatedly showed Colorado players yelling from the dugout after routine strike calls. Their pitcher worked faster. Harder. Angrier. And then came the moment that changed everything. It happened in the fifth inning with 2 outs and nobody on base. Ohtani stepped into the batter's box again while the crowd stood in anticipation. The Rockies pitcher took the sign, nodded once, and fired another high fastball inside. This one came even closer than the earlier pitches. Ohtani nearly lost his balance trying to avoid it as the ball screamed past his shoulder. The stadium erupted instantly. Dodgers players shouted from the dugout. Dave Roberts took several steps onto the field before stopping himself. Even Ohtani looked surprised this time. Not angry. Surprised. As he walked briefly away from the plate, the television cameras suddenly captured something strange inside the Rockies dugout. Several Colorado players appeared to be laughing. At first, almost nobody noticed it live. The broadcast quickly returned to the field. The game moved on. But social media did not miss it. Within minutes, clips of the Rockies' dugout reaction spread everywhere online. Fans replayed the footage repeatedly. One player appeared to mimic Ohtani jumping backward from the pitch. Another leaned against the railing smiling while teammates around him reacted loudly. The internet exploded almost immediately. Because now the dangerous inside pitches no longer looked random. They looked coordinated. Inside Dodger Stadium, the atmosphere turned hostile. Every Rockies pitcher was booed loudly for the rest of the inning. Every close pitch triggered reactions from the crowd. The tension no longer felt like ordinary baseball emotion. It felt personal. And according to reports later that night, several Dodgers players believed Colorado was intentionally trying to intimidate Ohtani physically instead of pitching to him normally. What made the entire situation heavier was Ohtani's response. He never charged the mound. He never shouted toward the dugout. He never pointed fingers. Instead, he quietly stepped back into the batter's box after the near-hit pitch and launched the very next fastball deep into right center field for a towering home run. The stadium exploded with noise as Ohtani rounded the bases without expression. No bat flip. No celebration. Just silence. Somehow that made the moment even colder. The Rockies' dugout, which had been loud moments earlier, suddenly looked frozen. The replay of the home run became secondary almost immediately because attention quickly shifted back toward the earlier footage from Colorado's dugout. Former players appearing on television during the game broadcast began questioning what they were seeing. One analyst said something that instantly spread across social media. If those reactions happened because they expected the pitch location, MLB is going to look at this very seriously. That sentence changed the entire conversation surrounding the game. After the Dodgers secured the win, reporters rushed toward both clubhouses expecting emotional reactions. Inside the Rockies' room, the atmosphere reportedly felt tense and defensive almost immediately. Several players denied any intentional targeting when questioned by reporters. The manager insisted his pitchers were simply trying to establish the inside part of the plate against one of baseball's most dangerous hitters. But the explanation sounded weaker every time the replay aired again on television. On the opposite side of the stadium, the Dodgers clubhouse carried a very different feeling. The players were angry. Coaches were furious. And according to several insiders, some Dodgers veterans believed the Rockies had crossed a line that baseball quietly understands but rarely talks about publicly. Pitching inside is part of the game. But repeatedly throwing near the same player's hands and shoulders while teammates laugh afterward created an image that looked terrible for Colorado. When Dave Roberts finally entered the press conference room, reporters immediately focused on the pitches to Ohtani. Roberts sat down slowly, folded his hands together, and stared toward the front row before answering the first question. A reporter asked whether he believed the Rockies had intentionally targeted Shohei Ohtani throughout the game. Roberts paused for several seconds before speaking. There's a difference between competing aggressively and repeatedly losing command in the exact same area, he said quietly. The room immediately became silent. Roberts rarely speaks carefully unless he is genuinely upset. And everyone inside the room seemed to recognize it. Another reporter asked Roberts directly whether he thought Colorado had planned to intimidate Ohtani physically before the game. This time Roberts leaned back slightly in his chair. I think the league has access to all the footage, he answered slowly. They'll make their own judgment. That sentence exploded online almost instantly. Because managers almost never speak that cautiously unless they expect Major League Baseball to become involved officially. And according to reports emerging only hours later, MLB had already begun reviewing game footage from multiple camera angles before the night was even over. The league reportedly became especially interested in the Rockies' dugout reactions following the fifth-inning near-hit pitch to Ohtani. One insider described the review as more serious than a normal dangerous pitch investigation. That description alone immediately intensified national attention around the story. By the next morning, every major sports show in America opened with the same footage. Ohtani diving backward away from inside fastballs. Colorado players reacting in the dugout. The fifth-inning near-hit pitch. The home run moments later. And slowly, the conversation around baseball began shifting from frustration to disbelief. Former pitchers appearing on television admitted the pattern looked difficult to defend. One analyst explained that pitchers occasionally miss inside accidentally, but repeatedly missing in nearly identical locations against the same hitter during emotionally charged moments creates suspicion very quickly around the league. The situation became even worse for Colorado after another camera angle surfaced online later that afternoon. The angle appeared to show one Rockies player signaling toward the inside part of the plate moments before the dangerous fifth-inning pitch to Ohtani. Fans immediately interpreted it as evidence that the pitches had been planned beforehand. Whether the interpretation was correct almost stopped mattering. Public opinion had already turned aggressively against Colorado. Then came the announcement that stunned the baseball world completely. Major League Baseball officially confirmed disciplinary action against multiple members of the Rockies organization following its investigation into the Game 1 incident involving Shohei Ohtani. Suspensions were handed down. Fines were issued. And according to league officials, the punishment specifically referenced behavior inconsistent with standards of player safety and sportsmanship. That wording immediately became the center of attention across sports media. The Rockies organization released a statement denying any deliberate attempt to injure Ohtani. But by then, the damage had already been done. Around baseball, many fans no longer viewed the situation as ordinary inside pitching. They viewed it as a failed intimidation strategy against the sport's biggest star. And what made the entire story even more powerful was Shohei Ohtani himself. Because through all the chaos, Ohtani never publicly attacked anyone. When reporters finally asked him directly about the investigation after the game, he answered in the calmest way possible. One reporter asked whether he believed Colorado pitchers had intentionally tried to hit him. Ohtani lowered his eyes briefly before responding softly. "Baseball is emotional sometimes. But I just want everyone to compete safely." The room became completely silent after those words. Another reporter asked him about the Rockies players laughing in the dugout after the near-hit pitches. Ohtani paused for a moment before answering again. "I try not to focus on those things during games." Even after becoming the center of one of the biggest controversies of the season, he still refused to escalate the situation publicly. And somehow that made the entire story feel even heavier. Because while the baseball world screamed in outrage around him, Shohei Ohtani simply kept playing baseball. Quietly. Calmly. Almost sadly. Over the following days, the replay footage continued spreading across social media while debates consumed television shows across America. Did the Rockies intentionally plan to intimidate Ohtani physically? Were the punishments fair? Had baseball crossed into dangerous territory emotionally? But underneath every argument sat one reality the sport could not ignore. The face of baseball had repeatedly been placed in danger during a nationally televised game. And whether intentional or not, the images coming from Colorado's dugout made the situation look far worse than ordinary baseball aggression.